God help me to make good my vow. And God bless all of you.
If you haven't got a queen, you make do with film stars and pop stars. But if you've got a queen, obviously it's so much better.
For over 6 decades, Queen Elizabeth II has been among the most famous and influential women in the world.
The Queen has connected with the British people in a most extraordinary way. She's been as constant as the Northern Star.
She came of age amid the death and destruction of a world at war.
In her lifetime, we have been grievously threatened by a power that would have annihilated us.
Her parents were putting their lives on the line, and Elizabeth knew that.
A German plane dropped its bombs
And nearly killed the king and queen.
These things are the price we pay for the high honor of standing alone in defense of the liberty of the world.
In the tumultuous decades after World War II, Elizabeth II shepherded her realm through often violent political and social turmoil.
Her reign has been a reign of extraordinary change and challenge.
She has a very strong sense of duty. In private, she's very human.
She's a warm human being, and it comes through when you meet her.
Through her eventful decades on the throne, she has endured scandal and tragedy.
It turned out to be an annus horribilis.
But she showed her usual stiff upper lip.
Her steadfast character, forged in war and tempered in turbulent times, she's kept a promise made to her subjects.
She vowed that whether her life was long or short, she would devote it entirely to the people of England.
She said she'd stay, and she's staying.
This is the story of Queen Elizabeth II.
The true measure of all our actions is how long the good in them lasts. My own association with the Commonwealth has taught me that the most important contact between nations is usually contact between its peoples.
Queen Elizabeth II celebrated her Diamond Jubilee in 2012, marking her 6 decades as Britain's reigning monarch.
Her father had a great comment when he was congratulated for becoming king. He said, well, you know, it's not that great a job. There's no room for advancement. In a way, she can do nothing, and in a way, she can do a lot.
Beginning in the Middle Ages, the British monarchy has evolved from a sovereign with absolute power into a constitutional monarchy, in which an elected parliament has the power to govern, and the king or queen is a figurehead, a ceremonial head of state.
I pray that the blessing of Almighty God may rest upon your councils.
It is the ceremonial head of state that represents the history, the tradition of the country. And she has performed that function absolutely brilliantly.
While exercising her ceremonial role, the modern English monarch maintains strict neutrality in matters of state.
The Queen is above politics. Indeed, much of her influence is precisely because she is above politics. She exercises her influence by example. And her example, particularly in terms of public duty and public responsibility, is quite remarkable.
What we like about the monarchy is, first of all, the continuity. The fact that the monarchy is a seemingly unending institution that passes from generation to generation.
She's really, for many people, a symbol of what Britain was and what Britain is. And in that kind of symbolic role, that's where the real power of monarchy kind of lies today.
There have been 66 British monarchs since the year 827, when King Egbert ruled all of Anglo-Saxon England. None reigned longer than Queen Victoria and her great-great-granddaughter, Queen Elizabeth II. She is the living embodiment of 12 centuries of royal tradition.
The essence of something that is very hard to define and put into words. But at the heart of that something is that extraordinary language, lineage, presence, comfort, reassurance, a steadfastness, but also a kindness and concern that has allowed us to have a mum and for us to be our mum in a reign of extraordinary change.
The monarchy, they say, is slow to change. This Queen has evolved, At a time in history when the world has moved in all its aspects faster and more comprehensively than ever before, Elizabeth II is as relevant now as she was in 1952.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong.
They became the House of Windsor because of World War I.
With his realm at war with Germany in 1917, Queen Elizabeth's grandfather, King George V, changes his family's name from the very German Saxe-Coburg-Gotha to the very British Windsor.
He thought, well, how can we get a good English name? And somebody said, well, you know, you stay at Windsor Castle, wouldn't that be a good name? And that's what they picked.
King George V and Queen Mary have 6 children. The oldest are boys, David, the heir to the throne, and his younger brother Albert, known as Bertie. David is still a bachelor in 1923 when Bertie marries Elizabeth Angela Marguerite Bowles-Lyon, the daughter of a Scottish earl.
She turned down the king quite often on his many proposals because she didn't really want to have a life that was particularly in the limelight.
She accepted the 3rd time, partly because he stuttered, and she realized, oh, well, they can't really push him forward for a lot of royal duties.
The whole notion that he would have to stand before the British people and be a leader was sort of terrifying to him.
The prince and princess give birth to their first child, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor, on April 21st, 1926.
Princess Elizabeth had quite an idyllic childhood. Her mother and father were, for their generation, quite involved in their children's lives. They did some traveling for their royal duties. They actually missed Elizabeth's first birthday because they were off on a royal tour. But by and large, it was a very loving family.
Elizabeth's only sibling, Princess Margaret Rose, is born in August of 1930.
Princess Margaret and Princess Elizabeth were very close. Temperamentally, they couldn't have been more different. Princess Elizabeth was quiet, reserved, conscientious, always did the right thing. Margaret was the joker, the entertainer.
Elizabeth's uncle David, the heir to the throne, is a jazz-age bachelor playboy. In contrast, her family projects an ideal of English domesticity. The young princess is tutored at home, a tradition in the royal family for a child who isn't destined for the throne. Princess Elizabeth is a few months shy of 10 years old on January 20th, 1936, when her grandfather George V dies, and her uncle David becomes King Edward VIII.
David had been adored by the British for being a playboy. They actually loved it. It was the flapper era. It was the wild and gay 20s, and so he personified that.
And he spent much of his time playing polo and whining and dining and being a playboy.
With the carnage of World War I fresh in the national memory, and Adolf Hitler building a German war machine that threatens his European neighbors, Edward VIII has a problem.
David definitely had sympathies for the Nazi Party and admiration for Adolf Hitler.
And any notion of sympathy toward what was going on in Germany in the 1930s was worrying.
He wanted to be part of the international discussion, and the Germans were happy to help him out with this. He wanted to be a modern man and eventually a modern monarch, and to have a modern kind of wife. And that really got him into trouble.
Soon after his accession to the throne, a scandal erupts over the king's desire to make Wallis Simpson his wife.
That was a huge problem because she was a twice divorced American. My goodness, how bad can it get?
He was like a 15-year-old in love for the first time. First of all, he thought she was the most beautiful thing since Helen of Troy. We all thought she looked like the back of a bus. And the government tried everything to discourage him.
Intent on marrying Mrs. Simpson, Edward VIII yields to intense pressure and abdicates after just 10 months on the throne.
You all know the reasons which have impelled me to renounce the throne.
The scandal has a profound effect on Princess Elizabeth.
She had had a relatively normal childhood for 10 years.
And life changed, obviously, enormously after the abdication.
On the day her uncle abdicates, 10-year-old Elizabeth's father is formally proclaimed King George VI.
Bertie was not brought up to be king. Up until the abdication, he did not want that role and felt himself to be unprepared for it, and much of the country thought he would be unprepared for it.
There were articles in the British papers specifically saying, oh, he is such a frail man, he just won't live very long. They totally underestimated the man.
The accidental king is crowned at Westminster Abbey on May 12, 1937.
Elizabeth, heiress to the throne, is 11 years old. One day she will be the principal in the stately and elaborate coronation rite, which goes back more than 1,000 years.
Suddenly, her father had this burden thrust upon him. And his daughter became the heiress presumptive.
While her father was learning to be king, she was incredibly close to her father and was always with him.
When he knew that she was going to be his heir, a program of preparation was set in motion.
Elizabeth celebrates her 13th birthday in the spring of 1939 and soon begins an intensive course of private study under the vice provost of Eton College.
In addition to that, she had her father, who was the only person who could really talk to her about the challenges of being a monarch. Her mother also played a role. Her mother knew that Elizabeth was innately shy, so she would pretend to be various dignitaries. She would teach Princess Elizabeth how to have conversations with them, all of which stood her in good stead when the time eventually came, and she had no idea when it would come.
In the summer of '39, with war on the horizon, the royal family visits the Royal Dartmouth Naval College, where 13-year-old Elizabeth meets Cadet Prince Philip of Greece.
He was an 18-year-old naval officer in training.
He was extremely dishy, it has to be said. Tall and upstanding and in the Navy. There was everything right.
Philip is the son of Prince Andrew of Greece, and as a great-great-grandson of Queen Victoria, he's Elizabeth's second cousin once removed.
They clearly hit it off on this meeting, and as the royal yacht sailed out of the harbor, here was young Philip stripped to the waist, quite a handsome young lad, rowing madly after the boat, waving goodbye to the princess.
Philip's family has origins in Denmark and Germany. Imported to Greece in the mid-19th century, they were deposed and exiled when Philip was just a year old. Elizabeth's parents are not in favor of her interest in a banished and impoverished Greek prince.
Elizabeth's mother really wanted her daughter to marry an English aristocrat with a big estate and a title similar to her own.
She didn't think that Philip was appropriate at all. She referred to him privately as Philip the Hun.
Princess Elizabeth's war years were a really important shaping experience for her.
The second chapter of Elizabeth's life and the Second World War both begin on September 1st, 1939, with Hitler's crushing invasion of Poland. 2 days later, Britain declares war on Germany.
We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender.
Monarchs from all over Europe were leaving their countries. The Queen Mother said, you know, the king will never leave the country. And if the king doesn't leave the country, neither will I or my daughters.
The war is depicted as the people's war. And the monarchy, by staying in London and by not sending the princesses away, kind of depicts themselves as one of the people.
They remained at Windsor Castle, a very well fortified, very well guarded Windsor Castle, but there they remained.
In her lifetime, we have been grievously threatened by a power that would have annihilated us, or tried to if they got on our shores.
France falls to Hitler in June of 1940.
Once France has fallen, there's a moment, and it's a very fragile moment, where England decides that it's going to stand pretty much alone against Hitler.
In the summer of 1940, we were absolutely convinced that we were going to be invaded. The question is, when are they going to invade? Is it going to be next week, or is it going to be the week after?
While the British people worry about invasion, many English cities come under aerial bombardment. The daily death and devastation of the Blitz.
Hitler tries to bomb the British into submission.
60,000 civilians dead, row upon row of homes, nearly 4 million damaged or destroyed.
It's very hard for people who have not lived through it to comprehend the all-encompassing fear and terror of those attacks. And the King and Queen were under attack.
Her parents spent many of their days at Buckingham Palace in London, which was bombed 9 times.
They were having breakfast together. They could hear an approaching plane, and it seemed to be getting closer and closer. The king got up and he went to the window, looked out, and he said, "Good God, it's one of theirs." And a German plane came right over Buckingham Palace and dropped its bombs.
And nearly killed the king and queen. They were putting their lives on the line, and Elizabeth knew that.
Can you imagine a little girl growing up in that atmosphere? Terrible bombing and destruction.
Princess Elizabeth watches her parents conduct themselves amid the Blitz with dignity, good humor, and firm resolve.
The royal family toured London and other places which were bombed to share people's experience of the horrors of war. That was a very important demonstration of what the monarchy is about, that you're there at times of danger for the country.
Led by the example of her mother and father, 14-year-old Princess Elizabeth begins to take on a more public role. In the fall of 1940, she makes her first public speech on radio, addressing children evacuated due to the war.
We children at home are full of cheerfulness and courage, and we are trying, too, to bear our own share of the danger and sadness of war.
For Elizabeth and her sister Margaret, life during wartime at Windsor Castle is dominated by men in uniform.
They were surrounded by all the officers who were assigned to protect the royal family. Among the guests were visiting officers from places like the United States and Australia and New Zealand and Canada. This was the world that she was going to be in when she became queen, surrounded by all these advisors who were men.
Princess Elizabeth also does her part for the war effort. In March of '45, she joins the